It's interesting how hard it is for games to fight for wall space in the marketplace right now.
It's a bloodbath.
So I have a lot of games I play.
A lot.
I play a lot of games.
It's not normal.
You stock quite a It's not normal. I am AB normal if that's the case, yes. But you stock a lot of games too. Like you actually carried, when you opened, you carried what? You carried Flames of War because you were big into that community. They were very loyal to you. You carried Malifaux, Infinity, GW's 2 main games.
Yep.
And I'm trying to think of anything else. X-Wing, or is that it? 5.
X-Wing on opening day, yeah.
X-Wing on opening day. So 5 games.
Yeah.
You carried 5 games.
Yeah.
How many are still there of those original 5? Workshop's still there for both, obviously.
Yep.
Infinity's still there.
Infinity's still there. X-Wing's gone. Flames of War is on the way out.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting how hard it is for games to fight for wall space in the marketplace right now.
It's a bloodbath. Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
And one company's doing the majority of the killing.
You know what I always think of when I think of this? And hey, everybody, welcome to another Inside Tabletop. I'm talking to Chris from Lords of Wargames and Hobbies here. We're going to talk about a question. Our posit for this is Games Workshop a monopoly? Are they a monopoly inside the industry? I always think when we have this conversation off camera, I always think of that scene from There Will Be Blood. I drink your fucking milkshake.
Oh my God.
I just screamed at the camera. That probably sounded terrible. I just think of Daniel Day-Lewis just drinking your milkshake. And it's a real question. I don't know what the answer is, but I thought this was worth exploring because you are at the coalface of companies trying to have a share of this market and what that looks like compared to the 600-pound gorilla in the room, which is Workshop.
Absolutely. And if we had to chart it on a graph, like in the 9 years we've been open, there's kind of like the opening phase. If you're there's a podcast and people are watching a video, so I'm doing this with my hands. I'm doing a wave thing with my hands. There was a peak where probably a few years, maybe a couple years into opening the business, we had a lot of games, like probably in the 12, 13, 14 range, where we were really trying a lot of things and bringing in small games like, the drop fleets and the...
Sure, yeah, you had all the Hawk War games. You had a bunch of like the TT Combat games.
Yep, we did some like Frostgrave minis for a while.
Sure, you bought an Osprey, that's right.
A lot of stuff like that. And yeah, just the attrition of time has kind of brought it right back down to the point where we're almost like in a strange way, like in terms of product variety, almost like back to where we started.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a few that have hung on. And there's one in particular we'll talk about later that seems to always be there.
Yes.
And I have theories about why that is, but let's first explore what we mean by monopoly, because that's a very loaded term. And I actually pulled up what is the legal definition of a monopoly.
Oh boy.
A business or interrelated group of businesses which controls so much of the production or sale of a product or kind of product as to control the market, including prices and distribution. And I think Games Workshop would argue they're not a monopoly because there's tons of other companies out there.
Right.
I think the argument, or not argument, but the question I want to ask you is, as a retailer, is it viable selling tabletop war games to only sell those other products? And if not, then why is that? Because to me, that is that definition between how much of the money in the ecosystem of customers is flowing in one direction.
Right.
And I have a big theory about that, which we can get to in a minute, but that's the posit here, right? The premise for the sake of argument. And again, this isn't a good, bad value judgment thing. It's what does the landscape look like?
Correct.
This is just trying to take like a 10,000 foot view.
Trying to be as objective as possible.
Absolutely. Here. Yeah. I don't think it's a good or bad thing because people make their livings off selling Games Workshop product, and so does Games Workshop. And there's thousands of employees inside Games Workshop. But the reason I want to kind of have this conversation today is there's two more follow-up questions to this, but the first one is, are they a monopoly? Do they qualify as having so much of a control of the market share as to be synonymous with wargaming? And then the other flip side of that is, what is that? What are the long-term impacts of that? And what does it mean to get into this as a new company, as a startup? Sure. Could you possibly do that? So what is your point of view of this? How much of, if you were to look at your wall, how much of your inventory is from Games Workshop, is from one company? And let's take the hobby products out of it, because you are
no, of course, yeah, I know, yeah. Let's
just talk about game products, like rule books, model kits, stuff like that, because you're unique in that you also cater to the artist, so you have a disproportionate amount of paints.
Correct. Blue, I'll try to. Yeah, I'm just going to keep it to minis or whatever. Yeah. And I think it's important just to point out as a preface that, without saying monopoly, I think you can't really argue one fact about Games Workshop, and it's that they're at the very least an anchor product.
Yeah.
And the way you kind of judge that is that do you actually physically see in existence any hobby stores that don't have Games Workshop, right? You'll see lots of hobby stores that don't have other miniature games.
Right.
And if you'll talk to any store owners, they'll tell you that like there's no point, right, in opening a hobby store if you're not going to have those anchor products.
Right.
And I remember back in the day when we first opened, like even the Games Workshop trade department is interested in you having other anchor products like Magic the Gathering, because they understand that these pillars help you stay around, so that
they want you to be a long-term customer.
They want you to buy from them forever, right? So I think we can start at the point, at the very least, where we're at the point where we can say, at the very least, they're an anchor, and we can build off of that. So Games Workshop, when we first opened, occupied probably about half the wall space for miniatures, maybe a little bit over half, maybe 60%.
Right.
And what's happened in the last 9 years is, and I have a bit of a theory about this, is the release of these, they call them box games, but we still call them specialist games, because that's what we always used to call them.
Right.
We'll call them specialist games in this video. All the specialist games, we're talking like the Necros, the Blood Bowls, the Legions Imperialis, the Age of Darkness, the Old World now, even Lord of the Rings. These products have all been released and repackaged in the last decade. And the effect that those products have had, I almost describe it as a war on the wall.
Okay.
Right? So picture your typical 700 to 1,000 square foot hobby shop, and I think that's probably where most kind of sit in. The ones that are, you're lucky if you live in a suburb and you have low rent and you have the big hobby shop that's thousands of square feet, but I think most hobby shops are pretty small. And most places are pretty full, pretty full of stuff, right? So when Games Workshop says, hey, we have this new game coming out, what they're really telling you is to find space for it.
Right.
Right. And as you know from your track record of being in business with Games Workshop, is that generally their products sell pretty well.
Of course, yeah.
So what you're always trying to do as a small business is try to maximize the sure things and minimize the risky stuff. So inevitably you kind of scramble and look for space on your shelf. And like most places, you get to a point where you have to cut something to make room for something new, right? So I thought, geez, we have 10, it's 10 specialist games on the wall now. So what's happened is those specialist games now occupy, it's not like they take space away from 40K and AOS, right? So they start to grow their own space in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to take away from things like space for Malifaux, things like space for X-Wing, or whatever kind of little project game you want to have on the side that takes up space.
So that's the interesting thing, because in that definition it said products and related products. I can't think of another game company that has more than 2 products of the same type. Games Workshop has 9, 10.
Yeah.
If you count the board games, if you count the Warhammer Quests and the periodic splash products and stuff too, they have within their one brand 10-ish different games you can play, all that are kind of targeting a separate, different type of customer at a separate, different type of level.
Yes.
So the same kind of guy who has the space and time to play a game like Infinity could play Kill Team. And so they have a product for that guy.
Yes.
Right? Or a Warcry. So they have a product for that guy. The same person that could play a Malifaux has a Warcry aimed at them, or a Blood Bowl aimed at them, or one of these games that's sort of within that sphere. So what's really interesting is, if you can't think of another company that has that many, at least 10, then they're the only company that is of that size, that has even the capacity to produce that many, and that's now putting a war of competing products on your wall to push out these other similarly targeted and sized brands and products.
And it's interesting, like you can even look at like recent sort of data. You look at games like Conquest Parabellum, the Last Argument Kings, whatever that game is.
Yeah, beautiful miniatures, great game.
The
really nice guys
Song
too.
of Fire and Ice game, Kings of War. These all kind of exploded out of the space that like Warhammer Fantasy Battles kind of left. And it's hard to not look at something like the re-release of Old World as a deliberate attempt to recapture that tiny bit of market that they had abandoned, quite frankly, because they had decided at that point it wasn't big enough. So they're more in a place now where they can say like they're going for like full saturation essentially, and they're not leaving any part of the hobby market like up for any sort of competitor to be in it.
At least not be in that space, right? To not compete in that same space.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of like just a good way to like kind of picture. So for those of you that are listening, you know, your local hobby shop, take a look at like how much space it occupies. Like that is a powerful indicator. Like you think you're new to the hobby, you're going to your local shop, and we'll talk about the Warhammer store as being a huge thing too, because maybe the only hobby shop in your neighborhood is a Warhammer store.
Well, that's the next question is there's no other company that has a worldwide chain of retail stores that can exist making a profit just selling one thing.
Yep.
Just selling, like if you think of like a market share thing, they sell one thing. They sell Warhammer and Warhammer related products. They exist at a profit. They also recruit, I would say, the largest proportion of people that end up in this industry's ecosystem. So that was actually my question number 2 is, can you think of any other company that has the capacity to make new customers, to breed customers the way that Games Workshop does? Because how many of your customers came to the tabletop gaming industry through a Warhammer store? That they pass through that gate first. Not to say that there's none. There will be people whose first game is Infinity or whose first game is X or Y.
Or they try cards first.
Or they try cards first, and that associates them with it because they see it there first. Yeah. But how many of your tabletop wargaming customers passed through that ecosystem before they got to other game systems from outside the Warhammer ecosystem? And I would say that, again, we have no way of knowing. But I would say if I was to make a straw poll, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do like a straw poll thing. How many people, and maybe, actually, that's probably not even a good idea for me to do that. Someone who only makes Warhammer content should do that. Yeah. Because I would imagine that my viewership is probably going to be the most contrarian to that kind of a poll. But I'd be really curious to see who first, if they're being honest, first found this through a Warhammer related product. Right. Or had their first painting lesson there, or learned to play a tabletop war game that was Warhammer first. Not to say you didn't see something else somewhere else first or have an association with it, but like if you were to honestly say I went from interested to built and painted to played my first game, if I made that hobby loop, that gameplay loop, that it wasn't through a Games Workshop product, I would say that the vast majority of current customers at least have probably had that be their journey. What do you think that looks like in your store?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I am always mindful of this because, like, you know, as someone who, you know, we spend a lot of time with our customers, getting to know them and really trying to give them a personalized experience. You obviously find out where they, you know, you get to the point where you find out, is this the first game they've played? What are they getting into? How did they get into? Right. And the only company I can think of that had this kind of going, and this is anecdotally through my own eyes, is there was a period during the pandemic, I think, where people were not going into stores, physical locations.
Of course, yeah.
And coming into contact with like things to do at home online. And I think like Asmodee's products like Star Wars and Marvel were fairly popular among first-time hobbyists during that period.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, you're at your kind of like peak Marvel excitement in the sort of like movie chain.
Yeah, just post-Endgame.
I think like even Star Wars like hadn't had so many not great TV shows come out.
Mandalorian started pandemic as Mandalorian. Remember?
Yeah,
there was a huge.
So there was a good
Mandalorian.
Uptick.
Mandalorian totally upticked them.
Yeah.
And honestly, there was a bit of goodwill still left over from Rogue One, because Rogue One was literally the best Star Wars thing to have been made
And they had like the Clone
Probably
Wars
like
TV
20
show
years.
that was really good and stuff like
Yeah,
that. So they were making some pretty
their own
good stuff. They
generation.
were making some pretty good stuff. So I saw actually probably the only time I've ever seen in the years I've been in the industry, not first time Games Workshop hobbyists. It was so rare before. For the first time, I was like, wow, this is like the first time you're, and I started to wonder. I'm like, is this a sustainable thing? It didn't turn out to be.
Well, we'll circle back to that because that's my third question.
Okay, well, yeah. So, and I think when you actually think about the steps a new person takes to get into the hobby, it starts to make a lot of sense. So, like I was saying earlier, you imagine yourself as a new customer. Where are you going to go first to check out the hobby? Well, it might be an FLGS.
Right.
Cool. What is the biggest thing on their wall going to be? It's going to be Games Workshop.
Just visibility wise, like if you just walked in and looked at the walls, you're going to see probably a product that has a Warhammer logo on it.
And one question I always get, which is it's a hilarious question, but it really what they're asking is like, the question is, what's your most played game, or like, do a lot of people play this? People always wonder, like, are there a lot of people playing this? And what they're really asking is like, is my purchase going to be okay? Like, is it okay to buy this? And is it going to last for me?
I'm making an investment right now.
Yeah.
If the return is fun, am I going to get to have fun?
I'm a little scared.
Yeah.
Can you
reassure me
it's going to be okay?
That people actually do this. I'm interested in doing this, but
and even at an FLGS, what like that you're way more likely to see a game of Warhammer happening just spontaneously.
This is my argument always against the Kickstarter game thing, right?
Yeah.
As to why it's so hard for I almost call them like vaporware miniature games. They deliver a bunch of stuff up front, but because retailers don't have like a direct line to that product later on, if they didn't take part in the Kickstarter, because a lot of them do like retailer pledges now, or that once that product's gone at the retailer, it just kind of peters out in the retail stage because you can't walk in and see a spot on the wall for it or people playing it. And these games just evaporate over time. Yep. They become vaporware. They become something that doesn't have a meat space like presence the way that something like Warhammer does, not just with their retail chain, but with the real estate of your wall.
It's actually a really interesting thing to think about, like maybe a topic all to itself. The idea that like something has to kind of like currently exist in a physical space for sale and also have ongoing support for someone want to still engage with it on a personal level. It's kind of fascinating. Like people always say about the old world was gone for 9 years or whatever, and the vast majority of people stopped playing it. It didn't disappear.
You can still play it.
You could still play it, and people still did. Yeah. But most people were like, "Oh, it's dead." And this is where
it's because no one wants to go to a party in high school. They don't think anyone's going to show up.
And that's really what it is, right?
That's
it.
It's the high school party
what's
mentality.
The cool party? What am I getting into here? And I want to know that there's going to be cool people doing it. It's alive and well. I'm gonna have fun. It's easy to make friends. All that sort of stuff.
It's our innate desire for social reciprocity, where reciprocity. Sorry, where we want people to enjoy and have a good time with, and we want to feel like we're part of the popular thing, right? It's the antithesis of that disagreeableness that's in me, where I always seek out the thing on the sidelines or on the margins and go, but look at this thing that no one's looking at. Look at how cool it is.
So you just start to think about that, and you think about that capture that Games Workshop has for that initial interest in doing a miniature hobby.
And that reassurance.
Yeah. I would, so the only way you could probably talk me out of thinking they're a monopoly is if you included other model hobbies, like gunpla building and like, because those are such a different way to go with hobbies.
That's and it's funny because that's appreciating the object on its own merits.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's having recruitment being done by 40 years of media basically. Yeah. And it's funny how you're right, absolutely. But you can almost make the argument that Bandai has a monopoly in
you could. And right? so I think there's a tangent. I think we have to be careful here. We say if a customer comes in and they're like, I'm interested in building models.
Yeah, what we're actually talking about here is tabletop gaming. We're talking about building, painting, playing games.
So I think, and I think that if that's true and all those other doors are closed off, I think you have to make the case that Games Workshop's capture, the net they have at that beginning stage, is massive. And
And they're the only ones actively doing it. No one else has a retail chain.
That's
no
right.
one else. They are the closest other people come is having a call center or a trade account department to do cold calls and have a relationship with retailers that is more than just an order form on their website. Nobody else is actively out there hiring staff to try to tell people who walk in the door what the miniature wargaming hobby is and that they should have a good time being part of it. They're the only ones spending money on that level of advertising for an entire industry. An entire industry of that. So of course they have that size capture.
Absolutely. And what we've seen happen you're very much just all in on this, like a part of this world, but like the online, like social media world and the YouTube world and the content making world, in the last, what was Warhammer community, like 6 years old, they have really cemented, I think, that part of their monopoly.
They are the algorithm.
Right? Yeah. Where they just, they're and they did it in such an ingenious way where they just made everybody else do the work for them, right?
If it's gotten big enough, if they've spent enough money to make Warhammer as a brand be big enough that it's now worth people making Mr. Beast style content about Warhammer, that says that the level of engagement they've driven through their marketing structure is significant. If you can make I ordered these 10 hobby products off Temu / Alibaba and have that get 500,000 views, but there's enough people interested in that and it's picking up algorithmically enough that people can make a living doing that, you have gone from zero where everyone's a fan and no one has any, it's all just tangentially related. It's about Warhammer, but it's still kind of the open seas algorithmically to there is one signal and one broadcast. And it's 100% about the word Warhammer.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I think that is in and of itself interesting that most companies have given up in the digital space.
So if your avenue is like you've kind of given up on the the recruitment space, it's so unbelievably dominated by Games Workshop, and then the same thing goes for the the digital space. I see companies saying, okay, well, we want to try and maybe get them when they're in maybe a lot not interested in the game they're currently playing. We're going to try to recapture that customer and get them to try something new. So that seems to be the offering that other companies are kind of playing on.
Yeah. Well, the real offer, I think, is that you are now big enough that there are people making imitations of your miniatures as an industry.
That's huge.
Is that the only people who can now succeed are Remoras on the whale, right? And their offer is get my STLs to print your own, not Space Marines, not Chaos Space Marines, not Tyranids, not orcs, not whatever. There's an entire industry now of 3D printer goes brr of people who are basically riding the wake of that marketing. If so much money and time and attention, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because the more you talk about something, good or bad, you can be mini wargaming, you can be discourse minis on either side of it. And it algorithmically builds itself. It's self-fulfilling, right? It's basically a volleyball being passed between sides, and all it is engagement. So all news is good news. All drama is good drama.
Yep.
And that then creates its own industry on the side of people running Kickstarters for STLs, doing whatever miniatures to play Warhammer with. You can say it's for its own game, its own thing as much as you want. They are Warhammer miniatures. They are being done as homages to Warhammer because there's money to be made doing that. And so if you can have a black market now underneath of a single company, because there's nobody doing that for Malifaux. There's lots of people doing that for Star Wars and for Marvel, but that was already a thing.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. That was already a thing getting ripped off because it was already big.
Yeah.
So if you're big enough, if you've reached that saturation point where there is a black market, not black market really, but there is a knockoffs industry underneath you of the Louis Vuitton bags of Warhammer, then you are at a scale now where you are the industry because you have sub-industries eating your leftovers.
Absolutely. So there's the knockoff companies, the ones that are trying to basically be, recapture that sort of like, oh, maybe you want it for a little cheaper, or you want like a little bit of a different
It's its
design.
own hobby. It's its own hobby. Honestly, hunting down STLs and 3D printer goes burr to play Warhammer, and the like punk credit that you get from showing up to the gaming night having a fully 3D printed army is like a fuck you to whatever. Like that's a thing.
And well, here's my other thing is like, and is this a different category? Maybe those that are resentful of the whale. So
of course it is. You have to create a counterculture. It's got a counterculture.
What was War Machine's driver?
They were the counterculture Warhammer.
Right.
Absolutely. That's how you could market your way into the industry.
100%. Right. So, but the catch-22 there was if it's only resentment driving your product, right?
And those customers still came from that person first.
That's right. And let's say you can make up with daddy or whatever at some point.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a tenuous situation, right, to build a company off of, right?
Yeah.
So
if all the customers start in one place, whether they're now for or against that original thing or come back and go forward, it's still one pool of money. It's still one ecosystem.
Yeah.
And people might lapse or leave or go somewhere else because fuck you, you've wronged me or you've invalidated my collection or whatever it is. It's still one economy, right? And so what's interesting to me is asking that question now. How do you start a miniature wargaming company today? What would it take to become a legitimate competitor with Games Workshop? How many millions in marketing and advertising? How much production? How many staff would you need to keep up with them just release-wise? Just to make something new 52 times a year? What would it take? And the closest we've gotten so far, you've already said, is 2020, 2021, you got Asmodee.
Yep.
They are a business daddy that has that money.
Mm-hmm.
So what do they do to get off the starting block a little bit faster? They go to established IPs. They don't want to make their own brand. They grab a brand that already exists. They grab Marvel. They grab Star Wars.
That's right.
They buy Fantasy Flight whole cloth. They've got a design team. They got production infrastructure. They basically try and start a Games Workshop from the ground. And you see for the first time, maybe this could be a thing. So now where are we today?
Yeah, and like just to give people a little bit insight, not everyone's going out to like big conventions and stuff like that. I was legitimately taken aback at Asmodee's presence at Adepticon last year.
They were on the lanyard.
They had exactly, and they had a huge hall. They had a huge professional setup. They put a ton of effort into all the terrain, and they made it beautiful. And they were running tons of events full of people.
If you were staff that worked at the Renaissance Schaumburg, you would have thought they were the biggest company there from the way they looked.
Because they paid people to work there. Games Workshop doesn't do that, right? And I think so. Having seen that, and now where we're at now, which is a bit of more of a concerning, like you've seen sales. Like this is of course anecdotal, but we also have like eBay metrics for this. We can see their products in certain genres are just not selling, not moving. The excitement's kind of, and it makes sense. The IPs they're attached to are not in the upswing they were a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, there's a decline. There's a Star Wars and Marvel weariness for sure.
For sure.
And that is the diminishing return of renting someone's IP. That's right.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, they've also chased Games Workshop with pricing. Where their starter set was very competitive when it first came out, it costs the same as a Games Workshop starter set now.
That's right.
Because Games Workshop sets the market.
And just to quickly touch back on the convention moat, I think you pointed out a really good point, which is who put the money in, right?
Yep.
Games Workshop, this is the power that you see every year at a convention like that. They don't have to spend money to do any of that. It's $0 for them.
People organize their events for them.
It's all done by community driven, pure passion, and they still dominate the hall in a lot of the side rooms, all sorts of stuff happening. That is a natural occurrence based on their success. Yeah. And when you see something like that, it makes sense now. Like they paid to be there, they paid for everything. So it was a bit of a show, right? So that kind of just puts things in a little bit more perspective. They were, like you said, trying to buy their way into.
But that's what it would take. They had the best shot of anybody because they are a commensurate sized company already off their board game distribution, and the fact that they're a worldwide seller of other tabletop products already.
And you made a great point. Like they are a great example of someone who they've obviously studied Games Workshop very carefully, because you see the way they price their miniatures. They are pricing them like their Games Workshop products. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. So, and had some success with that, and also had some not success with that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I think what ends up happening is you hit the natural wall of a licensed product. You're not allowed to make anything. You're allowed to make what's already been made by the thing that you're licensing from.
right.
So they can't make a new Skywalker. You can't just have an extra Skywalker come out of the woodwork. They can't make a new Mandalorian.
Well, and I think the miniature game is suffering from the same thing that the movies and TV production is suffering from, where you can't, once you move off everyone's favorite characters, you have to establish new favorite characters, but you're going up against the greats, the favorites, right? How are you going to beat the Avengers?
Yeah.
You did the Avengers already.
How do you make a better Spider-Man?
Well, they just make new Spider-Mans.
I
think they get it more than anybody.
That's true.
Keep making Spider-Man, dude.
Yeah.
People want Spider-Man?
Well, to the fact that we've got to a multiverse in order to make new products and new stories shows where that IP runs into a wall, and even just the IP of comic books in general. Like, how do you tell a million Batman stories? Well, you just keep making it a different world. They had to do it at some point.
Yep.
And so if you have all of that going for you, how much of your wall space today is Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars, all that stuff? Not to say that it isn't selling.
No.
But if your opportunity is, I want to make money selling tabletop
and also like
games,
we done this preface in other videos, but like the people behind those games they make great products. Like
they're tremendous products.
Like Marvel is probably
people.
like I tell people, Marvel's probably like the tightest, best miniature game I probably ever played.
And also the closest to the offer of what the IP is.
Yes.
You took a great group of game designers, great artists, great sculptors, super talented people, and you said, what if comic book the miniature game?
That's right.
And they delivered it.
They did it. They made it. And it's fantastic. Yeah.
So this isn't, and again, we said this, I think a different one. This isn't an indictment against the quality of the products in any way. It's not a qualitative statement. It's what does it take to break past?
I think it's the point that it almost doesn't matter. Right?
And that's the thing. What if these guys had everything market share wise possibly going from them at the time? The hottest IP, it's still being developed, juggernauts behind them, like Disney with infinite money, a great business daddy with a stable product line, and they aren't 60% of your wall right now.
Yep. And here we can get into just to get into a few more of the nuts and bolts. Like we'll cycle back to the humble retailer once again. And this goes back to, well, first of all, the net's not there for them, right? They don't have that capture net at the beginning.
They're still capturing Games Workshop's former customers.
They're trying to do that, right? They don't have, here's what they don't have. They don't have someone who works for them calling the store every week and saying, hey, how's our products going?
Yep.
What are you doing to sell Wolverine to people?
Yep.
There's not a conversation like that happening. They don't have their own Asmodee shops, like you said. Where
they do. They have a couple of them.
Sorry, they're in Europe, right?
They're in
board
Europe,
game. I think they're more board game focused, but they don't have them in North America. We'll just use that as an example. Where your only option to start the hobby is Asmodee.
Or you might wander into it for the first time and be recruited as a customer.
Or whoa, what is a model hobby? This is cool, right? So
imagine if there was an Atomic Mass Games store in every Disneyland. Imagine if they just had here's a free idea, guys. By the way, if you want some consulting, I'm available for hire. But imagine
you just gave away the goose right there, man, right away.
Right. Imagine your business daddy could put a store anywhere.
Yeah.
And imagine you could put that store and a demo table and 3 staff members in every Disneyland. Done. What if? got some experience in retail.
That would be the start to a chance, I would say. The start to a chance. Yeah. So until someone tries that, no one's
You're not making any customers that start off yours from the beginning and associate tabletop wargaming with that brand.
With your brand, yeah.
Because no matter what you do right now to associate people with things, even if they've never played Warhammer before, if they want to try their first tabletop wargaming and it's not Warhammer, the conversation is going to sound something like, yeah, it's like Warhammer, but right. Marvel. Yeah, it's like Warhammer, but because it's become synonymous with tabletop wargaming. Even historicals. Oh, it's like Warhammer, but it's World War II.
Yeah.
Oh, because if you're a kid and you're approaching it to the thing you can see the most prominently.
Well, isn't that interesting too, that the biggest, most successful companies that make historical models actually made their games like Warhammer? Like they recognize,
they made a mass market, yeah.
They recognize that there's not a great chance that the first time someone plays is going to play their game. They know that they're going to get someone who's played 40K or played fantasy or something, and they have a history interest. Hey, that's me. I've done that before.
Well, when we started playing Flames of War, we were like, oh, it's just 3rd edition 40K. It's move, shoot, assault.
It's great. You move, shoot, assault. Immediately you're there and you're painting toys and you're buying their stuff, and it's
familiar.
It's familiar.
It has a familiar
100%.
set of bones. You can see the DNA. Yeah.
And these companies are very aware that they exist off the grace that is Warhammer, right? Like, they know.
I don't think they'll ever say that out loud.
No,
I don't think anyone would ever say that
Yeah,
out loud.
No.
But that's where I want to come to our third piece, because there's an oddity. There's a control out there. There's a control company that flies in the face of everything we just said.
Yep.
And that's Corvus Belli. Corvus Belli is not of a commensurate spot size to Games Workshop. They have the market share of Games Workshop.
Tiny, yeah.
But they're almost 20 years old now. They've outlived all their competitors of the time when they started.
And I think it's important to say, when you say outlived, I think it's also important to say they have maintained size or grown. And not shrunk.
They've gotten bigger.
Yeah.
They've gotten more market presence at a sustainable pace.
Yep.
And they recruit their own customers.
That's right. They recruit their own customers. That's
their
very important.
Own customers. I think it's very interesting. They are the least based on Warhammer of any miniature war game that currently exists, because they developed out of RPGs.
That's right.
Which I think is very interesting. They developed out of a RPG session. And in fact, most of the named characters in the first run of Infinity are the player characters of the original 4 designers that they played through that RPG. They're a set of tabletop wargaming rules created to do bigger fights in the RPG they were using. It's why they're D20 based, stat check based, and they've evolved into a tabletop wargame out of RPG roots. They have a wonderful community presence, a great community ambassador, but they're decidedly not online.
Yeah, that's true.
Compared to Games Workshop. Not that they don't do things online and have wonderful online interactions with their customers, but they don't try to be online. They aren't doing articles about how the meta changes. They aren't doing any esports commentary. Anything that's happening in that regard is being done mostly by their fans.
Yep.
But even then, not that much. And the game is comfortably releasing something every single month.
Correct.
Like one thing for each of their armies
everyone who's involved with Infinity as a consumer, even as a retailer, I would put this in harmony. Customers, retailers, everyone knows what to expect from the company. I think that's really important, because if I'm going to stock a product in my store and I don't know when releases are coming out, I don't know if the company's going to release something early on their own direct-to-sales channel, or if they're going to put stuff out early at a convention or have exclusive stuff on a Kickstarter that I can't get. The deal with Corvus Belli, and I don't deal directly with them, I deal with them through a distributor.
Yeah.
But the deal that I feel that I have with them is that I always know what to expect from them. They do not change things drastically. They make a consistent, informed decisions about what they're doing. And I think that resonates all the way through, right? All the way down to the customer that knows what to expect. Monthly release. They've got a retailer who's sure that they're not going to get screwed over by this company, so they continue to support them, and it just kind of creates this sort of like
homeostasis.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see.
It's someone not trying to keep up.
Yes,
I feel like the difference. I feel like a lot of the companies that burn out are trying to keep pace with something as big as Games Workshop. They have set their own pace instead, and they operate in a way that is very measured. Mm-hmm. It's not hype driven.
It's part of just...
They celebrate all kinds of their customers. They celebrate the painters and the gamers almost equally. They have a lot of community networking. And then the thing that they do more than anyone else is they sell miniatures. They get paid from selling miniatures.
To the point where they don't even try to make money off their rules, right? So they're very aware. They're very aware of who they are as a company and what they want to be, and I think
the size that they want to stay at.
Absolutely, and you have that assuredness when you deal with them. I know every year at certain times when new big things are coming out, because they always do it every year at the same time. And yeah, they've you could also make the argument they've improved their model quality every year for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm.
They're still making money selling metal miniatures.
It's unbelievable.
Nobody else is.
And I never knew, and I've told people talking about, I'm like, I hate metal models personally. Yeah. I despise them. But Corvus Belli is the only company that makes me buy metal models. And it's because they somehow have bled all of everything you can get out of a metal model. They have gotten out of a metal model, like to the point where it's insane. Like joint connectivity and all this sort of engineering they've done on them. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
As they start to move away from metal.
As they start to move away from metal. Yeah. For the bigger miniatures. Well, for economic reasons. Right?
Well, we're going to see with Warcrow for the first time.
We are a fully Siocast. Fully Siocast. Or no, sorry, Ninja Cool now.
Is it called something else?
There's two different ones they were working with. Okay. The one that the Assassin AR and the Marut came in is like a whole different material, which is a lot crisper than the softer stuff from Siocast. I don't know what it's going to be though. I got no insider info there. But they're interesting because to me they're the control. They're the one company I look at that's very comfortable with where they're at and doesn't seem to, they're never sprinting, they're never trying to like do too much. They're just like carrying on. If it's the tortoise and the hare, they're just sort of like slow and steady wins the race and happy with where they are.
And I think to your point earlier, I think if you're a new miniature company, a lot of them look at like, oh, we want to study Games Workshop and be like Games Workshop. Your real example should be Corvus Belli if you're starting a new miniature company
today. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Find your niche.
Find your
own customers,
and survive. Right? Like, because at the end of the day, if you're not around, then who cares, right?
That's it. They're not trying to feed off of the format that's kind of established right now in the industry. And I think that's maybe my point. And then what does it mean that they're still here when all the other competitors, for the most part, have come and gone or rebranded or been under new management or turned into a license that's got traded between companies. Right. Like you have a very weird economy then inside this industry. So how do you feel about this conversation? Where have we landed? I don't think legally they qualify I don't think they meet the criteria to be a legal monopoly. Like, I'm not saying something should be done about this because I don't think you can at this point. And I think the product is so niche, no one cares. And I think they're so diversified now into maybe becoming a streaming service. Because here's the final question. Yeah. What happens if Games Workshop stops making miniatures?
Whew. Like tomorrow?
I mean, in 10 years. If the market share of what they do is movies and TV, because that could happen. Weirder things have happened. Sure. What happens if there's no more Warhammer? What if they just close their retail chain? What if they just sell miniatures direct from their factory now and through trade sales and through you, and they close their retail chain? What happens to the industry 10 years after that?
Well, I mean, it would, in my opinion, it would have to give opportunities to other companies. You'd imagine, but who knows?
If they metamorphosize into just a brand management company like a Disney, or get bought by a Disney, what if they become just valuable enough that Business Daddy buys them?
I mean, history has shown that the number of big businesses just keeps getting smaller and smaller. So like, it's definitely something that should be entertained. Like every company's in.
They don't get a choice when that happens.
No, exactly.
Games Workshop wouldn't.
They're called hostile takeovers for a reason.
They wouldn't go to Games Workshop. They would go to the people that own Games Workshop. Right. They would go to the shareholders and slowly accumulate everything until they have a controlling interest. If their brand gets hot enough,
and the more big hats that step out and get rid of their shares, the easier that becomes, right?
That's right. Yeah. So you have an interesting board of directors right now with Games Workshop because 2 of them worked in media. I don't know if you know that.
No, I didn't.
2 of them work in telecommunications and media.
Oh, there you go. Not an industry that has any monopolies at all in Canada.
And not an industry that has anything to do with tabletop war games or games in general.
No. Yeah, it's interesting.
Reading annual reports is fun. But I think that we've definitely, I don't know, I'm not trying to prove anything in this
No, I don't think we've proved anything.
But I want to explore, I want to ask a bunch of questions because I'm very curious about this. Yeah. What does it mean? Are they a monopoly? No, not technically. But do they set the industry for everything?
Are they monopoly adjacent?
Could being good enough, could making the best miniature game ever produced be good enough to make a competitor for them?
It depends what you mean by competitor.
I mean someone with 6,000 employees, their own production facility, and their own retail chain.
I couldn't say yes to that question at this point.
No, I can't either. No. I don't think that happens.
But I agree. I don't think that really makes them a monopoly. Because I think other companies like Corvus Belli have proven you can absolutely still exist in that market.
But you can never be as big as them.
But you're not going to do that. You're just not going to, right?
You have to be satisfied at
It's like setting out to become Pokemon. You just don't do that.
I'm gonna be a Nintendo.
Yeah, I'm Nintendo. Yeah,
It's there's Lucky Best and First.
How many new consoles come out from brand new companies, right? Like,
Steam Deck. They're the closest right now.
It's the closest example.
But it's just a computer.
It's just a computer with a... That's right.
It's a computer.
They're cheating a little bit.
They're cheating a little bit, yeah. I mean, technically, they're all just computers with branding.
What?
I know, right? It's like your car. It has an internal combustion engine. Did you know that you can just make one of those if you want? You could 3D print one of those if you could 3D print steel. Chris, why is there not a 3D printer goes burr for cars?
So let's not do 3D printing, okay? I get enough of that stuff throughout the week at the store.
I can't wait to talk about 3D printing. But I think that's, if I was to hammer those three key points, they have their own retail chain.
Yeah.
Nobody else has that. No one else has tried to have that. Call me Asmodee. You want to just, I'm open for business. You want to start putting things in.
That wasn't even his best idea.
That wasn't even my best idea. That was just, that was for free. I'm gonna train some retail staff to hawk games.
That's right.
At Disneyland, we can figure that shit out. And then the fact that with everything, with paying the amount of money they did to have everything going for them, you don't have 60% of your wall being Star Wars or Marvel affiliated product right now.
Right.
That says something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that says something about what the market share is and what that means for the economy of that business. Sweet. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we'll do it on 3D print next time you come back. I think we've got enough of these for the day.
Maybe Jay's the better one for that. He has a special hatred in his heart for... Did I say hatred? No.
It's more like hatred.
Malaise? I don't know.
But I mean, that is a whole thing that came up in this conversation, is the fact that there is a sub-market of people just making... I can't find the right word for it. I don't want to say imitation or knockoff. Like, those are cheap words for it. But like... that are making the word proxy always gets thrown around, but that are making unofficial miniatures to play a game with.
Well, this would be a good topic for a whole thing to itself. But the saturation that Games Workshop has, and you look at other industries as well, where you have like a really dominant, saturated sort of market from one company. Does it create some very interesting things at the very bottom of that market, where like people start to get really creative? You get a lot of individual creators, people doing like, kind of just like, well, I'm not going to build a big company, so I'm just going to do this one thing I like and make it, right?
In the Disney allegory, it's the convention artist market.
Right.
It's when you go down Artist Alley and there's a million people drawing Spider-Man. That's all illegal.
Oh, yeah, but it's so cool.
It's all illegal.
Yeah.
It's 100% illegal.
Yeah.
But a blind eye is turned to it.
Sure. They understand what it is.
They understand what it is. It's a sub-market of people who are carving out individual niches.
Yep.
And for every person drawing Spider-Man at a gaming convention or an Artist's Alley at some kind of like fandom con, that's that sub-market. That's the exact same thing as somebody with a 3D printing Patreon making not Sisters of Battle and making not Space Marines and making not Tyranids. It's the same industry, but you have to have gotten big enough for that to be worth doing.
That's right.
That's where we're at.
Absolutely.
All right. Sweet. I think we've beaten this one to death.
Absolutely.
All right.
It's
Bye,
dead.
everybody.
It's dead. Bye.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another Inside Tabletop. I hope you enjoyed this discussion on the landscape of the tabletop wargaming industry, what it looks like right now, what it's looked like in the past, and what it might look like in the future. Tell us your thoughts on the overall impact Games Workshop's having on the industry in the comments, and if you want to check out more from Chris and Jay at Lords of War, you can check out their YouTube channel.